Yeah, we're going to switch into more underground now about growing the soil. Do you guys have a carbon tax? You don't have a carbon tax? Okay, in Canada right now we have a carbon tax. They're taxing us on all the carbon that we use. It's a way to government. Farmers are not happy with that. Most farmers are not happy with that at all. So we're having this issue right now in Canada where we're having to pay for all the fuel you burn, extra, everything that you burn, you have to pay an extra tax on. So the whole thing is about carbon, and I've got a bit of an issue right now with our society. Okay, our society is absolutely hooked on reducing emissions, right? The emissions of carbon. The cow is getting blamed for, releasing carbon into the atmosphere. But everybody's focused on emissions. Okay, I think we need to think net carbon. Net carbon, because carbon is an element. Element is matter, and matter cannot be created or destroyed. Right? You can't make any more carbon. There's a set amount of carbon on this planet. You can't destroy it, you can't create it. Okay, it all has a cycle, and it goes through a cycle. So when someone's bragging about trying to get to be carbon neutral, what does that mean? Does it mean you're releasing less carbon? No, it means that it's a math equation. It means you can sequester as much carbon as you emit. Okay, to be carbon neutral on a farm, you need to sequester. But nobody talks about carbon sequestration, right? Not in the media. It's all about reducing emissions and how the airline company that I flew here on, they're bragging that they're going to be carbon neutral by 2030 or 2050 or whatever their goal is. Okay, it's never going to happen. Can't happen, because all they do is emit, right? Without some fake math, they're not going to get it, okay? So there's only a few industries on the planet that have the ability to be carbon neutral or go beyond carbon neutral, okay? Agriculture is one of them, okay? Because we can sequester carbon. I'm going to talk about sequestering carbon right away. For the forestry industry can sequester carbon, right? It goes into the trees, but it's not stable. Okay, a forest fire can come along and release that carbon instantly, and it's released back. And it takes a long time to grow a forest. Whereas in our agriculture, we can add carbon to the soil and actually sequester it and go beyond carbon neutral, right? More than just using paper straws, right? We have so much more ability in agriculture. Are we doing it as an industry? No, we're not. Because most of our industry is emitting so much that we're not offsetting what we're sequestering. So my goal here today is to get you guys thinking about sequestering more than you emit. Okay, it's a math equation. If you want to be carbon neutral or go beyond, it's possible. And it's going crazy on me again already. So we took a test. My wife did most of the work. That's the way it's supposed to go, right? She just left, so I'm okay to say that. We did an online carbon calculator. It was out of Britain. This was a few years ago, and it took us all day to do it. It talked about the fuel we burnt, the wood we burned, the batteries that we have. We have solar panels on our shop, so all the ins and outs of that. Talked about all the grassland we graze, the forest areas that we manage. We came back at 94% sequestration and 6% emissions. Okay, let's say I'm 25% out. We're still way beyond carbon neutral. Okay, so society frustrates me because they're only talking about emissions. There's research dollars going into feeding seaweed to the animals in a feedlot, right? That it's going to reduce the amount of emissions that they give off. Okay, how much carbon was burnt hauling the seaweed from the ocean to Nebraska? Okay. There's research dollars going into this. The dairy industry, they've got like big time research going into this. Sniffers in the feed bunks to measure the amount of carbon that they're emitting as they're eating. And they're going to genetically select the animals that release less carbon. The carbon went into the cow. It's got to come out. Where is it going to come out? You can't create or destroy. Like, originally it was grass. Right? They ate the grass, the carbon went into them. Before that, where was it? It was in the air. Right? The plant took carbon out of the air into the plant. The cow ate the plant. the cow belched it out, farted it out, whatever. So if we're going to select animals that release less through their mouth, where's it going to come out? More out the back or in the meat and in the milk, right? It's possible. Then where does it come out? Us, right? It's still going to come out. Matter cannot be created or destroyed, okay? There's huge research dollars going into this. You know why they're doing it? Because they want to look good, right? They can brag that we've reduced emissions by this much and we're good. Okay, I'm not against the dairy industry, don't get me wrong. I'm just showing you our society is focused on emissions when we should be focused on carbon sequestration and the net between them. Okay? So we have the ability to do this. We can go beyond carbon neutral. Okay? Most other industries can't. We have the ability. We're just not as an industry right now. Okay? So what is carbon sequestration? A lot of people don't even really know what it is. Real simple. I like to simplify things because I'm pretty simpleton myself. Carbon sequestration, photosynthesis, exudation, and biological conversion. Okay, we heard of the complicated version of this earlier today, so I'm going to give you the simple version. We need to increase the amount of photosynthesis that happens on our farms. How do we do that? We need to cover the ground, right? We need to capture more sunlight. It's pretty simple. My job is to capture sunbeams. There was a phrase I heard a while ago. Sunlight traveled 90 million miles to get here. 90 million miles. Don't waste it in the last 6 inches. Okay? You wasted all that effort, all that energy, because it was reflected back. If sunlight comes down and hits green growing plant materials, it gets absorbed into the chloroplast, by the chloroplast, right? If it hits anything else, dirt, concrete, pavement, it gets reflected back. Okay, there was actually, I had a University of Alberta study on my land. They came out and did 3 years worth of studies on my land. And one of the measurements that they did was actually a term called albedo. Okay, albedo is the difference in reflection of reflected light. So the amount of sunlight coming down versus what's coming back up. So they actually flew a drone out there for a set amount of time, and they recorded the amount of sunlight hitting the solar panel on the top, and they recorded the amount of sunlight hitting the solar panel on the bottom. Okay, it's showing the difference in albedo. Okay, so you want, higher albedo in your pastures, you're going to collect more sunlight. Okay, and just for reference, libido is a completely different term. Just clear that out. This is albedo. So we want as much green matter on the ground as possible. And another part of this, with perennials, it's pretty good. It's all season long. Another big part of this is in the grain industry, and I really want to get the grain industry into this regenerative movement because there's the biggest bang for our buck. Oh my gosh, we could sequester so much carbon if we get some of these big grain farmers on board. But the problem in that situation is, what about the shoulder seasons? Okay, for us in Canada, we've got a lot shorter season than you guys, but spring and fall, when there's nothing in the ground, we're letting all that light reflect. Okay, so picture a pea crop, right? Peas grow for 90 days. If you don't grow anything on the shoulder seasons, you're not collecting anything in the spring, you're collecting something for a short period of time in the summer, and then you're not collecting anything. And a lot of people go out and spray it out, right? Get rid of all the weeds because we want to collect as much sunlight as we can. So that's where intercropping and cover crops and things can help get more sunlight on those shoulder seasons. Okay? So we need shoulder seasons covered, and we need as much coverage as we can throughout the summer, and I'm going to collect more sunlight. Okay? I'm going to have a higher albedo. Okay. Number 2 is exudation. We heard a little bit about this, or the scientific term of it earlier today. Exudation or exudate. The plant pulls carbon out of the air through photosynthesis, pushes it down, forms it into glucose, pushes it down into the roots, and pushes it out the root tips to build the soil, to add to the soil. Now that exudate is feeding the biology, right? We really want to feed that biology as much as we can. So the more sunlight I'm capturing, the more I'm feeding my biology. It's also gluing the soil particles together. So dirt is silt, sand, and clay. That's it. That's geology. Okay? We add the exudate to that, glues it all together, and makes those aggregates. Good aggregation helps improve water holding capacity. Right? A good aggregated soil looks like cottage cheese. It's little clumps. Right? It's pore space. It's allowing that sponge, to create that sponge to hold on to water. Right? You guys been in a drought before, right? Right? You need that to be able to hold on to as much water as you can. So we've got to keep pushing that sugars into the ground. So what's happening above ground? The more sunlight you're capturing, the more exudate you're pushing out into the ground. And then we need biological conversion. Okay, this is where we need the biology in the soil to take that carbon and put it into a stable form. Right? Mycorrhizae fungi turns that glucose into glomalin. And it's a long-term stable form of carbon that even the biology has trouble breaking down. If we can get that into the soil, we add carbon to our soil, we get water. And then we get this stable form of sequestration. So we need all three of these to make them work. Okay? When I went to college, I learned that it takes 100 years to grow an inch of topsoil. Anybody else hear that? Okay. 6 months ago, a leading researcher from the university, I was in a discussion with them about carbon and soil, and they kind of scoffed at me. Well, it takes 100 years to grow an inch of topsoil, right? What are you wasting your time for? I'm like, no, it doesn't. So this is still the thinking in a lot of academia. Now, academia is changing fast. I don't want to insult anybody from academia. There's a lot of fantastic researchers that I'll defend them now, that they are getting into this regenerative or sustainable movement. But there's a lot of old school thinking still in there. But the reason they think that it takes that long to grow an inch of topsoil is because their thinking is from leaving residue. Now, I want to leave residue on the soil surface to create that soil armor, to reduce runoff, reduce evaporation, all the good things that it does. But if I'm trying to grow soil like that, most of that residue I'm leaving on top will break down, be decomposed and volatilize back into the atmosphere. Most of the carbon's just cycling above ground. Okay? What academia is not counting on is the exudation. Right? What I'm trying to do to grow soil is to go down through the roots and grow soil from underground. Okay? So I'm not technically growing soil. What I'm doing is converting the base, whatever I have, into soil. Okay? So this is a soil profile of the piece of land that the U of A did the study on of ours. See the little triangle coming down here? There's another bit of a one here, and there's a bigger one down here. Okay, that was a root system sticking down there over many years, pushing out exudate. And we're a very clay-based soil. We are actually in the gray wooded soil zone, so it was developed under leaf litter. Mostly, it was forested before, 50 years ago it was bulldozed. Okay? And I am creating topsoil where there wasn't any before. Okay, so the study that we did, the University of Alberta came out and did ours. It was all across the prairies in Canada, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. There was 30 different sites tested, and each site had 2 locations, right, across the fence from one another. One was an advanced grazing system, like mine, and the other one was a continuously grazing. So all 30 of these sites, they had a comparison across the fence line. So this was ours on our side of the fence. Okay. So these are all the different sites across it. This is us way up here. We were the farthest north, farthest west farm to be studied. Okay, so that was us. So our field, they were actually kitty corner. The 2 quarters were kitty corner across from each other. This was our pasture, and this was the neighbor's field. So history was very similar. The researchers came out and they picked pieces that have very similar history, similar topography. Like they wanted to make sure that this was a scientifically, reputable study. Very similar. About 50 years ago, both these were bulldozed, plus or minus. Then they were left. Like this is very rough ground, clay, rocks. You don't want to drive across this very fast. It's really rough. 12 years before the study started, so 15 years from when it ended, I took over managing this piece, whereas the other piece stayed continuously grazing. Okay, so 12 to 15 years is our time span here. In that amount of time, we changed the soil profile. Our plug is on the left, the continuous grazing plug on the right. So we went from 5.2% soil organic carbon up to almost 11% in 12 years. Okay. We went from, well, less than an inch of actual AH horizon. In the test, it says there's an AH horizon, but looking at the sample, you can't see it. It's all the same color all the way through, right? There was no change in the color. Ours was a distinct color difference. We have an average of 10.8 inches of topsoil now. We grew soil from underground. We converted the clay into topsoil, just with root exudates. Okay. Interesting thing here too, look at the nitrogen. Available nitrogen in the soil test now, 2.74 up to 4.22. Okay. The biology in the soil, you guys ever heard of the carbon-nitrogen ratio? Right? When you're doing compost, you got to put in enough straw to make it balance. Well, the biology in the soil want to keep your soil at a CN ratio of 24:1. So as you increase the carbon in your soil profile, your nitrogen automatically goes up because the biology will balance that. Okay, so yeah, more carbon, more water, more nitrogen. Win, 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 right? The only thing I add to my soil is carbon. What was the most important soil property that, what was his name? Willie. What most important one? Water. Okay, how do you get water? You add carbon. You add carbon to your soil, you automatically get more water holding capacity, you'll automatically get more nitrogen. Okay, what happens over the last 100 years as we've been depleting our carbon with tillage and overgrazing and hauling, crops off? The carbon goes down, what happens to the nitrogen? It's going down. Okay? We need to start regenerating the land, right? Regenerating these fields and creating all this. And it starts with carbon. Being able to use the plants to sequester the carbon. Okay. We have another study. I was able to, about 4 years ago, I was able to get a little bag of kernza. You guys know what kernza is? It's a perennial wheat. It's out of the Land Institute out of Kansas. And it's a perennial wheat. So you'd seed it once, and you could harvest it for multiple years. Wasn't that a great idea for the grain industry? Wonderful idea. They've been working on it since the 80s. So we actually got a little bag. I managed to get a little bag, and we seeded some plots to get more seed of it. Now we're actually able to do trials across Alberta. So we got enough now to do some trials. But we planted it in a plot in the good soil, 10 miles down the road. Okay, the good soil down the road, that's our black, we call it the Highway 2 corridor in Alberta. It's the black soil zone. I'm 10 miles off the black soil zone in the gray wooded soil. Okay, so we seeded this in the good soil because we wanted to make sure it did well, right? We went down there, and supposedly this kernza has a phenomenal root. Okay, this is the picture you see about kernza. There's their root system. I'm like, oh man, that's amazing. Look at the root compared to regular wheat, right? Kernza perennial wheat. So below ground yield is what we're looking for here, not necessarily above ground yield. So I was pretty excited. I wanted to go down there and dig a hole and see what ours actually looks like in our clay soil. Because this might be in a nice porous soil where it can dig nice and easy. We went down there, started digging a hole. So I told the backhoe operator, I said, we're in a zero-till grain farmer's field in the black soil zone, $150 an acre. We don't want to mess it up. So let's take the topsoil off first, put it in a pile. We'll dig down into the clay, we'll take it off, we'll put it in another pile. And then when we put it back, we'll put the clay down and then put the topsoil on top, right? We don't want to mix it up. When we started digging, we couldn't tell the difference. It was all the same color. It was totally depleted. That was the root system. Was not as impressive as I was hoping. But what I really saw was the soil profile in the expensive soil zone. $150 an acre to rent this. Mine is $20 an acre to rent. And now I have 10 inches of topsoil. He's got none. He's down to 4%. Okay? His carbon's been going down, even with the best management. If we start growing soil, we start building soil, we can reverse that. But we need to do that, right? I've lost 14 quarters of land to grain farmers over the years. They actually follow me around because they know I can do this. And they buy up the land after, like I rent all mine. I'm in the really expensive land, well, in comparison in my area. We're 45 minutes out of the 5th biggest city in Canada. So the land values, those acreages values go up pretty high. So that's why I don't own the land, we rent it. But it's part of the game. I lose land all the time. But yeah, there's certain grain farmers know that, boy, get greener pastures land. It'll produce like a son of a gun for a while. But that was a big take home for me, was the difference in that value. Okay. We actually had another University of Alberta professor come out to our land this summer for a pasture walk. His name is Dr. Derek McKenzie. Traditionally, he is a forestry soils expert, right? He's a scientist. And now he's moving into agriculture. So he admits right away he doesn't know much about farming, but he wants to learn. So he was going to come out and be our soils expert at our pasture walk. And he wanted to make sure he had his ducks in a row. So he phoned me ahead of time and said, okay, what exact piece of land are we going to be on? I want to know the exact quarter. Because he could look it up on all the soils maps that have been taken over the last 50 to 100 years. And he could know exactly what he's getting into. So when he showed up, he had 4 or 5 different maps on there. Some of them were old, but it showed exactly the curves and the land zone, all the zones, right? And so he knew exactly what he was coming. Gray wooded soil should have these horizons and whatever. So I dug him a few holes with my trusty old backhoe, the one that self-lubricates. He was pretty excited though. He says, normally I got to dig my own holes. This is pretty exciting. The first one was in the pig pasture. So it was actually in trees. So we dug a hole in there, and he started looking at the AH horizon, the B horizon, and the this horizon. It was all over my head. He was pretty intense about it. You could just see he loved his work. I love seeing passion in people when they get excited about something. I have no idea what they're talking about, but I still love it. Anyway, so he was right at home. Then we go out into the pasture where I dug a hole, and he gets into the hole, this hole right here, and he's just kind of stumped. He's like, and my wife actually has him on videotape saying that something's definitely different here. This is not what I was expecting. We are not supposed to have 10 inches of black topsoil here. Something's going to be said about this regenerative stuff. Like, he was totally learning about it. So really interesting to see a soil scientist like that completely stumped on what to say, because it wasn't what he was expecting at all. Okay, so because we're growing black topsoil where there shouldn't be black topsoil. Okay. A really good friend of mine. Well, he would have been a really good friend of mine if we lived at the same time. Jean-Baptiste was around in 1634. He was arrested and thrown in jail for the study of plants. Okay, he got in trouble. The reason he got thrown in jail is because his experiment went against the modern thinking of the day. Okay, the modern thinking of the day says this, and his experiment proved him wrong, so they said, no, you're wrong, we're going to throw you in jail. Okay, he was a little bit of a troublemaker by the sounds of it. So I'll tell you his experiment. Modern thinking at the time in 1634 was that plants grow from the soil. Okay, the plant eats the soil. So a plant will grow, use up nutrients, you'll take that plant away, and we'll have less soil, right? It would eat the soil and it would disappear. So he did an experiment. I'll use kind of partially his wording here. He took a large earthen pot. So I'm picturing that as a big flower pot. Dug a hole, put it in the ground, so it was contained. Took some topsoil. He dehydrated it. He dried it right out so he could get a weight of it. Took 200 pounds of dehydrated soil, put it in the pot. Okay? Then he planted a small willow tree in it, just a small little tree. Covered the pot with a screen so that wind couldn't blow soil in or out. And he covered that, and then he watered it. And then he kept watering this tree over and over. For 5 years, he had this experiment go on. So for 5 years, he basically grew a tree. All he did was water it whenever it needed to be watered. And in the end, he had this tree growing. After 5 years, he pulls the tree out, roots and everything, as much as he could, weighed it, and he grew 178 pounds of wood, of material. So there was 178 pounds plus. He didn't account for the leaves falling off every year. He said that in his experiment too. So there was technically more than that, but 178. Then he took out the large earthen pot, took the soil out, dehydrated it, and he reweighed the soil. And he had almost exactly 200 pounds of soil. Okay, so he disproved the theory that plants eat the soil. He basically, his conclusion was that plants grow from water, because that's all he added, and he ended up with 178 pounds of wood. Was he right? Where do plants grow from? The sun? Close? The air? The air. Okay. Every plant, every tree, every shrub, every weed on a dry matter basis is approximately 45% carbon, which we get from the air, hydrogen and oxygen, 45% oxygen, 6% hydrogen, which we get from the air, and nitrogen at 1.5%, which we can get from the air. Okay. 97.5% of every plant we get from the air. We only need 2.5% from the soil. Okay, that's an eye-opener for me. So how do we grow soil so fast? How can we grow an inch of topsoil every year? We're getting it from the air, right? All this carbon, all this hydrogen and oxygen. And nitrogen, we need bacteria now to help us with the nitrogen. Okay, we only need 2.5% from the soil. It's not very much. Okay. So do plants grow from the soil? No, they grow from the air. So the big difference in thinking in regenerative agriculture versus modern agriculture is modern agriculture grows plants from the soil, just like the modern thinking of the day in 1634. Okay? Regenerative agriculture, I grow the soil from the plants. I take a plant, I use that plant as a tool to bring carbon out of the air and to grow the soil. Okay? Total mindset switch. Okay? So we got to grow the soil. There's an old saying, the light bulb did not get invented by incrementally increasing the brightness of the candle, right? We didn't have a candle that we made a little bit brighter, a little bit brighter, a little bit brighter, a little bit brighter, and boom, there was a light bulb. No, it was a whole new idea. So I honestly think that regenerative agriculture is the whole new idea that we need to get into agriculture. There's so much money being put into, or from the farmer and from the in research side into the latest and greatest new variety of something, right? We're going to get a more drought tolerant this, or a more, more hardy standing crop of this. Okay, getting a little bit more yield is an incremental increase, right? A little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. The new latest and greatest bull, right? You're going to go to the bull sale and buy the best bull that's out there. Okay, that's going to be an incremental increase in your operation. Right? A few more pounds of weaning weight on average, right? That's an incremental increase. We need a big change. Remember the blue slide I showed you, the blue graph? We need a big change. Incremental increases is not going to fix this. What if you doubled the amount of effective rainfall you get on your farm? Wouldn't that be impressive? Double the rainfall every year. Okay. What if you eliminated your fertilizer bill? That's a huge change. Okay, we don't want incremental increases. I want a big change. I want something big, and the answer's under our feet for this. Okay, I already said that. What we need, we need a polyculture of plants. Okay, that gives us a polyculture of root systems, which gives us a polyculture of soil life. To me, this is the kind of the direction we need to head. We got to get away from the monoculture farming. And honestly, too, even in a perennial stand, to me, an alfalfa brome crop, that's basically a monoculture to me. There's so many gaps, there's so many spaces. We need to cover that ground as best we can. We got to try and get through that. I'm not going to go into the grazing side of it today because I want to focus on some of the crops that we've been working on. But to me, getting the animals out on that land to get more photosynthesis, to get more exudation, to get more soil biological conversion, I need to focus on the grazing concepts. Okay, real quick, a short enough graze period so that we're not taking the, grazing those plants as they start to regrow. It's called not taking the second bite. A long enough rest period so we have full recovery before we're getting back onto those plants. Right? To same thing, they're not getting that second bite. I need animal impact. Physical, animal impact on the land to give some stimulation, and biological impact, right? The manure, the urine, the biology associated with that. There's symbiotic relationships between the biology of the herbivore and the biology in the soil, right? That's going to kickstart and trigger all this biology underground. We need that. stock density. That's allowing you to have better manure distribution and better plant utilization. Okay? And then creating that soil armor is so important. It's like the skin on your body. It's that external layer that protects all of those internal processes. Okay? We need to have that land with that soil armor on it. Okay? It protects them. Helps reduce runoff, helps reduce evaporation, helps regulate soil temperature. I saw the rectal thermometers going out here. I mean soil thermometers. Right? Soil temperature is so important, really important. Think about the biology underground. If it's in the middle of summer and you guys, oh God, I'm not going to talk in Fahrenheit now, right? You get to 110, that's hot, isn't it? I'm in Celsius at home, so 110 during the day. What happens to that exposed bare soil that's showing? Right? It gets really hot, really hot. The biology doesn't like that. And then at night, when it cools off, it like drops. Right? So we got this roller coaster of temperature underground. Boy, that biology doesn't like that. Right? They need you want your employees to work for you, you give them good working conditions. Right? Give them room and board, food, water, shelter, protection from the elements. Okay? Even in the wintertime. Think about the root zone. How deep would your root zone be in a perennial, right? Let's say you leave a good soil armor, protects the top, catches some snow, holds onto that snow and insulates the ground. Now how deep does your frost layer go in the winter? Does it go 8 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches? Right? Nice protected. You got root zone below that frost that still has biological activity happening. 365 days a year. The biology is still there. Right on. If you have no soil armor, the snow all blows away, now your frost is going to go 3 feet deep, 4 feet deep. And now all your biology is dead. Okay, so that soil armor is so important in winter and in summer. But those are my basic concepts that I like to use when I'm grazing. Really easy to remember, right? G-R-A-S-S, grass, spells grass. I didn't come up with that. It was an 8-year-old in one of my classes one time said, well, I used to have animal impact at the bottom, and he said, if you just rearrange that, that would spell grass. So I can't take credit for that. But G-R-A-S-S. If you're doing any type of rotational grazing, you should be able to explain why you're moving animals, not just that you're moving animals. Right? You should explain the graze period and the rest period, and you want to get that animal impact and increasing the stock density and soil armor. So, okay, but that's not a grazing course today. Do we have a fertility issue in agriculture? Here's another friend of mine. Actually, no, this guy probably wouldn't have been my friend. The two of them actually, Carl and Justice, whoever figured out that they actually created this. But the law of the minimum. Years ago, I used to work at a fertilizer dealership. I used to be a truck driver for a fertilizer dealership. And this poster was always on the wall. Okay, so the law of the minimum has been going for many, many, many years, is that your crop will only grow to a certain point to the most limiting factor, right? The most limiting nutrient, right? Which is the weak link. Like, for example, in this barrel, which is the most important nutrient that you would need to add? Phosphorus? Okay. I just love this. To me, this is hilarious. It's pouring out of the barrel. But they've been using this poster for years. The water's running off your land, and you're worried about all the letters on here. I think it's hilarious. Most important nutrient. On a dry matter basis, 51% of every plant is hydrogen and oxygen, right? We don't have a fertility issue in agriculture. We have a biological issue. Okay? That water is so important. I don't add any other nutrients to my land. Okay? I add carbon, that gets me water, that gets me nitrogen. That's the big four. That's what I need. Okay? That other 2.5%, there's lots of it in there. Guess where my mycorrhizae fungi comes in? Can actually, break down stone and get me mineral. It can get me phosphorus. It can get me copper. Okay? I need the biology in the ground. That's what we have, a biological issue in agriculture, not a fertility issue. Okay. All right. Nitrogen, carbon and nitrogen I can get from the air. Those are the big ones. Water, obviously, we get from the air. We've got rhizobium bacteria. We've got other bacteria doing it. And we're trying to recycle nutrients. Do you guys like math? Let's do some math here. 80% of what comes out of the back end of a cow, 80% of what goes in the front end of a cow comes out the back end. Okay, so if they eat, everything they eat, 80% of it's coming about the back end. 20% you actually are exporting off your land in milk or meat or whatever you're selling. Okay, so 80% of it. So if our numbers here, let's go back a page, 97.5% of that. There's 2.5% that we actually got from the soil. 80% of that we got from the soil, if we're grazing it, gets recycled. That's 2%. We put back onto our land of the 2.5%. We're actually only exporting 0.5% of every plant. So that's what we actually have to import into our land on a yearly basis. But our biology, actually, like I said, there's lifetimes worth of nutrients already in your soil. But if we're recycling 80% of the 97.5 that we're getting new every time, we are continually adding big time to our land. We don't have to be depleting our land at all. The math says we can gain fast. We just have to do it. We have to understand what we're doing. Recycle the nutrients back. So that's why it's so important to have the animals on the land. Yes, we got to make a profit at this, right? We have to sell. I'm not saying we're going to get rid of all grain crops. It's not going to happen. But we can get animals on there and get halfway there. We can recycle half the nutrients. We put half the crop in as a cash crop, and the other half we take off as a grazing crop. Okay, that's a fantastic idea. Easily, when we're recycling 97.5% of it already, we're already gaining. We can sell some of that and then recycle a bunch. Okay, really important. Oops. So my very first broadcast and trample I did back in 2002. I'm not real fancy. This is a quad-mounted spreader on the tailgate of the pickup. I used to do it on the quad, but I used to have to drive back to the pickup to get seed to dump in it again anyway. So I spent most of my time driving back and forth across the field. So I figured, you know what, I'll just take the truck. And then I could set it on the back and we drive back and forth. Okay, real cheap, not very fancy, eh? How much money did I put into that? Sometimes I upgrade and I can rent this little Valmar, gets a little bit more accurate, and I can do the same thing, zip back and forth and broadcast that. Real cheap. I think I can rent this from our Applied Research Association for, I think it's $1 an acre they'll rent it to me for, right? Obviously, because I'm a member, they give you a deal if you're a member, but pretty reasonable. Okay. So the very first one I did was in 202. It was a cultivated field that I took over, and I was broke. I had no money, I had no equipment, I had nothing. So I went out there and I broadcast seed all over the place. And then I used the cattle to go out there and harrow it in. In the crop, I mean, obviously the volunteer crop was coming up, right? They had something to graze out there, but they had to go fight for it. That was what it looked like later in the summer. This one I actually fertilized. This was the last time I fertilized. It was in 2002. The guy, I got a floater truck to come out that time to come spread the seed for me. I wasn't using the broadcast. I got a floater truck out there. And they said they needed something to carry the little seeds. And if I'd go back right now, boy, that would be a cover crop with oats and barley and a bunch of bigger seeds, some peas and stuff. But back then, I didn't know. They just said you need something to carry it. You got to put fertilizer in. Okay, so I put fertilizer in. Man, we fertilized that thistle. Boy, that thistle did well. Okay, wow, it came up good. But then I did my grazing concepts on it. This was the year one. Didn't really work that well, did it? Year one, we grazed it, and I ignored the thistle. We did a good graze period, a good rest period, good animal impact, good stock density, good soil armor. And year two, look at how strong the grass is. Okay, there's still some thistle there, but they're weak and they're pathetic. And then still managing for those concepts, got that animal impact out there. Year four. Okay. I didn't put legumes out here. I should have back then. But I was worried because actually at the time, the year before, the crop that was out there the year before was fall rye. And fall rye is an allelopath. It actually puts out a chemical in the soil like 2,4-D that would kill broadleafs. So I was like, oh, I better not put any legumes out there. It's not going to work, right? I drove a strip through it, and I threw out a bunch of legumes as a test. I experiment on everything I do, right? There's got to be some kind of test I can do on this. And I just threw out a bunch of alfalfa and clover seeds. And for years, I had this weird little path of alfalfa and clover. So it would have worked, but I was worried at the time it was a waste of seed. Okay? So it came through really nice. So that was probably the first time I ever did my own sort of cover crop. Broadcast and trample in 2019. I've done a few of these over the years, but I'm just going to show you a few. This was on canola stubble. Took over this piece of land. It was about 60 acres. I was lucky because it was touching one of my pastures. When you're doing this and you got livestock, you got to be careful when it rains. Right? This land is very vulnerable. It's a cultivated field. If I got 3 inches or 4 inches of rain and my cows are out there, they're going to beat the snot out of it because it's not strong yet. Right? It doesn't have the soil armor. So in this case, I was lucky. It was just starting to rain. We broadcast a bunch of seed out there. I turned the cattle of about 300 bred heifers out there. They went around and ate all the little canola plants. They were a little runny. Don't stand behind them. It was pretty lush. And we basically stepped that in the ground just as it was raining. I had to pull them out, right? It was just, okay, we better get them out of there. It's raining. We're able to get that just timed right. You tell me the year it's going to rain right, and I'm going to tell you the year this is going to work perfect, okay? This one was a good year. Oh, it's going crazy on me again. So there it was coming back up during the summer. All that canola starting to come through. I'm like, oh, I got a good crop of canola out there. But then everything else started into gear. And now I've got this beautiful cover crop. 21 different species mix on 2 years canola back-to-back, by the way, before that. The guy was getting rid of the land, so he grew canola back-to-back. I never added any fertilizer. How did that get that tall? Where'd the fertility come from? From the air. From the air. That 21 different species, those different root systems down there, plus the biology from having those animals on there, right? We went out there and we put manure and urine out there. We stimulated it with their hooves, stimulated it with their biology, and it kick-started that into gear. We had a combination of different root systems to feed the biology, to kick-start that and get that fertility. Okay? So that was year one. Year two, the perennials came in, because I had a mixture of annuals and perennials in there. Year one was mostly annuals came in. The perennials came in year two, kind of like the horns, right? The horns, bring in the horns. Okay? I should do a whole orchestra on this, shouldn't I? Sweet clover, red clover, all those other things underneath there. Year three, worst drought in 100 years. Did it work? Usually at year 3 or 4, when I plant a crop like that, it usually starts to drop a little bit. Year 1 and 2 are great. Year 3 drops off. But then we had the drought of 2021, worst drought in 100 years. Still better than most of my places, but we've only had 3 years to try and build a soil armor, so we didn't have the water holding capacity yet. Didn't do very well. Year 3 didn't work very well. I'm like, oh, man, maybe it's not working. And then year 4, boom, come right back. We even had a drought on year 4. It was not as bad a drought, but it come right back, right? So the biology was there to kickstart it. 4 years in a row, where am I getting the fertility from? It's from the plants. It's from the biology. Okay, we've got an active biology in there now. I can't say enough about getting those different root systems in there. Okay, so that's what it looked like from the aerial photo. This one we used the truck and the broadcaster. And the first few lines here, there's some diagonal ones here. I let the teenager drive. Like, okay, that's it. Now I got the thing set. I'll drive, you get in the back and watch the cedar. And then we started getting straight lines. So here we did a little bit of loop-de-loops. We went a little too far in a few of them. I purposely was trying to leave a gap in the middle. Okay, I always do an experiment. Always an experiment. This was seeded double. I went over everything twice as much as I wanted to. This chunk here got all of the small seeded plants and all of the big seed plants, okay, which I'll kind of explain that in a bit. This chunk over here got just all the small seeds. Okay, so basically in this one we added oats, barley, peas, and sunflowers were the big ones. I had to actually broadcast them separately because they didn't fit in they didn't come out of the broadcaster the same. And then I was trying to leave a gap in the middle, but obviously we went a little too far on a couple of those corners. But to show you the difference, when we added the seed, it's going to go crazy on me again. There's the line. Okay? And it got even more dramatic. I couldn't find a picture of later on, but it got even more dramatic later. It made a big difference to add the seed. Big difference. This is what nature would do by themselves, leaving a cultivated field and just letting it go. And this is when we add the seeds and step them into the ground. So in my opinion, it was well worth it to add in the seed. Probably 4 times, I don't have the numbers with me, but probably 4 or 5 times the production on this side than the other. Okay. Oops. Going crazy again. We did another one in 2021. Only this time we didn't broadcast it. We went full out. We're going to make this work. Let's see the difference. How does it work if you can zero till this in? So this is the farmer that I worked with. He came in and did the seeding for me with this equipment. I wouldn't even know how to turn the thing on. And we had another drought. Drought of 2021 in my area was another 100-year drought, they said. How can the 202 drought and the 2021 drought both be 100-year droughts? But anyway, didn't work as good. But we still have some green. We have some polyculture. I'm not going to tell you that putting in a cover crop is a magic bullet. Right? It's not a recipe. It's not going to work every time perfect. I work with Joel Salatin from Polyface Farms, and we teach a school together now. And I love his one phrase. He said, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly first. Right? You're going to have to practice. You're going to learn how to do some of this stuff. It's okay to suck at it to begin with, right? When you first get going, some of the years it doesn't work the same. Maybe you got to get a different combination. The advantage that we're getting into now is that some of research is catching up to us on this, right? The innovators and early adopters have already been doing these experiments. And now we're actually getting research dollars going into proving which combinations work in which soil types and what happens. So hopefully we're going to get more successes out of this, because for the last 20 years, it's been the early adopters or innovators and early adopters that have been paying for the mistakes. Right? We have mistakes like this that, it didn't work so good. We should have put more oats in this one because the oats seem to do well in the other one next to it. Things like that to learn. Some of the understory plants came in pretty good. Okay? Not near as good as the first year though, but it was the drought. See my Phacelia? Really good in a drought situation. Phacelia does really well then. Okay, we also did pasture cropping, trying to seed right into my pastures. Somebody told me you couldn't do it. So, of course, I want to go try and do it. Everybody said you need to spray it out first. Right? You got to spray out that pasture, then go in and zero till into it, and then you'll get a much better catch. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to try and broadcast it, but I'm going to use cattle. I like using cattle for everything. So what I did purposely is I went out and overgrazed it first. We actually had 2 herds coming into this cell. It's 1,100 acres. One herd would go off to the west and one herd would go off to the east, and we'd graze them on 2 different rotations. So I brought the first herd in, and this happened to be close to the corral system. We hammered this one early on, knocked it right down. And then they left, and then about a week and a half later, 2 weeks later, the second herd came in. So we hammered the exact same pasture gain, right? Hit that grass right when it's starting to regrow, hurt it really bad. Then we seeded it, and that seeder is pretty fancy. I could go across the wife's lawn and she wouldn't even know we were there. It just cuts in nice. And then we left the cattle on for another 4 or 5 days, right, to try and let those plants establish and get going. So I really tried to abuse this pasture as hard as I could. Then we took the cattle off and let it grow. Worked quite well. We had lots of these new, like there's peas coming up in the middle of a pasture. This is the new type of, crimson clover. All sorts of new plants that were coming up that weren't there before. Okay, there's a dandelion. Sunflower. Not very many sunflowers came up, but I also noticed there was a lot of birds out there for a while after. Part of it we broadcast, and part of it we direct. Always an experiment. And there was so many birds out on the part we broadcast. I don't think there was many sunflowers that survived that. But we did have a few sunflowers coming. So it was coming. There was these little rows of seedlings. You can see exactly where we were coming up. We got all about this tall, and then it hadn't rained It just didn't rain again. In 2016, we had another drought. These 50-year droughts are coming a lot quicker now. And we just didn't get the rain. So most of them yellowed off and died. And then because of the drought that year, we ended up actually hurting that pasture more than we did benefit because we hammered it so hard to begin with. In my mind, I call this a success because I got them to establish, but then the taps just turned off. We didn't get any more rain. So whether I do it, how many times am I going to do this before I stop paying the guy to come do custom and I'll just broadcast and trample? I still love to experiment, but I would call it a success. It just ran out of rain. And of course, we didn't have the water holding capacity because I grazed the snot out of it for the springtime. Okay. Yeah, and then it kind of browned off. It just didn't get the moisture, and that's what it was later on. So it's doing a lot better now. But how much time do I got left? 5 minutes? Okay. So this is the grain farmer, part of his operation that I've been working with. I first worked with him, the very first time I worked with him was in 2002 in the drought. He had a wreck crop, and he wanted to sell me it wasn't worth combining, so he was going to sell me the green feed because he had a bunch of second growth and some mature stuff. It was really not a good crop for him to try and combine. So he was going to bale it up for me and sell me the bale. So I said, can I graze it? I'd love to come graze it. It's a half section. I can put a fence around. He's like, no. We don't want cows out here. Cows are bad. And so he was trying to get it baled up in September, and it was a really wet fall. Right after a really bad drought, now it's a really wet fall. He couldn't get it baled up. So he said, yeah, no, we'll get it up. And September rolled by, and then October rolled by, still wet, still not done. November, we're into November now, and he's like, well, hopefully we'll still there's no snow yet. Hopefully we'll still get it up for you. Into December, no, still no snow. I said, can I graze it? He's like, yeah, maybe. So I started pounding posts on January 7th. My post depreciation was fairly high. Trying to hammer that into the frozen ground, smashing. What I figured out is if you pound posts around the outside, the perimeter, in the grass, the posts went in nice because there was no snow yet, no insulation. They went in nice, no problem. As soon as I tried doing cross fences, posts were shattering, right? The ground was so hard. I figured out I had to pound the post right in the swath. Insulation, right? I just talked about the soil temperature. It's so important to have that cover. That's where I learned that way back then. So anyway, that was the very first time I swath grazed for him. It was very successful. He loved it. It was great. And I've been working with him ever since. But mostly just on saving him. Right? When he has a correct crop, he'll call me. We'll come graze it for him. It was about 5 years ago, he called me and said, you know what? We got this little chunk of land here that you can tell, lots of times it's wet. It's the lowland of the grain land. And half the time he can't seed it. Half the time he can't combine it. Maybe you should put some cows out there because I want to get some animal impact on all this other land. Okay, so basically I got this 100 acres. Okay, now we got a herd in there for the summer. That's the 100 acres. Then we've done some other stuff since. We've done some crop residues. There was pea straw out there one year. He had, actually there was a couple quarters with it as well, but I ended up doing 450 acres of pea straw residue. So we bunched it. Anybody know what a buncher is? It's a little device you hook on the back of your combine. It'll collect the chaff and the straw, and then when it gets heavy enough, it just goes dunk, and it leaves little piles across the field. Okay, so we actually bunched this one, and we had the cows out there for the winter. Very successful. He was really happy. We did almost all the winter out there on that. We've done swath grazing. He had oats and peas. He's experimenting a little bit with this now too. He grew oats and peas together. Some pretty good crop, but then we got a really cold fall, and the oats wouldn't mature. Right? The oats weren't maturing. He's like, we're not going to get this even done. We were planning on taking the pea and oat residue as bunches and graze it. He said, maybe you want to graze the whole thing. I'm like, okay, let's do that. So we grazed the whole thing, and he actually came out. He said, yeah, we made more money because it wasn't a good crop, right? It was a moderate crop. With the crop insurance and grazing, we made more money than we would have harvesting it anyway. He was very happy with the amount of money he made just from grazing it all winter. We took 100 or 200 dry cows, and we went almost all winter on that piece. So he was really happy with that. He came to me a couple of years ago, and he said, okay, we want to do this piece too. Let's do graze fallow. This wasn't what he said, this is what I call it. You guys know what summer fallow is? Right? Old school thinking, leaving your land to rest for a year. Well, we graze fallow. We rest it for a year, but we use cattle. So he would seed it down to something. In this case, it was a bit of a cover crop, and then we would graze it. And the idea is to keep it for 4 years. And then graze it for 4 years, rebuild the land, rebuild the soil, and then give it back to him. And then we'll do another piece and another piece. Now, this experiment has kind of gotten sidetracked a little bit now. It's still in his radar, but when canola like tripled in price, he's like, yeah, no, let's just put canola in this year. So it got sidetracked, but he's still got that thinking, so hopefully we'll get to finish that. Whoops, and it just exited. And we've done intercropping. So his idea was to do, so we've got a much shorter growing season than you guys do, so we're limited on our shoulder seasons. So what he's trying to do, intercropping for us, he's going to seed his wheat, let it establish, and then come in and spray for weeds. That's what he wants to do. And then come back in with his GPS and seed on 3-inch spaces, because he normally does 6-inch spaces, and put in a cover crop so that we'll have green plant living roots in the soil on the fall season. The advantage to him is his wheat gets a head start, gets established, so his cash crop, he still gets a good cash crop. Then he's got this green living root in the soil in the fall, right? That's the benefit to him. Benefit for me is that I've got green material to graze later on, right? If we would have seeded it with the wheat, his wheat would have competition, plus his, or by the time it gets to the fall, I've got mature plants that I'm grazing instead of nice green stuff for the fall. Okay, so we've done that a couple times. Hasn't always been real successful. I'm not going to say it's 100% by any means, but on the wet years, this does really well. On the dry years, yeah, there wasn't enough over there for me to take the herd over, but it was still living root in his soil for the fall. So he still got benefit of it. We're going to experiment with doing some more broadcasting. I'm thinking about buying a drone that can seed and being able to go above his crop later and putting in some clover or something to be able to get in that. So anyway, I'm out of time. The important part of this for me is this different types of root systems, right? Get that animal impact in there to get the biology. But I want annuals and perennials. I want tap roots and creeping roots. I want bunch grasses and creeping grasses, cool season, warm season. I want forbs and legumes, right? The more variety of root types you can get in the ground, the better it feeds the biology. Okay? Oats and barley, that's the same root type. So there's no sense in putting them both in. You don't have to, you can if you want. But if I'm going to look for different species to put in, species that are, will grow in my area preferably and have a combination of different root systems, that's what I'm after. Okay? So maybe a take home, go out and dig some holes. Go look at your soil. Go see if you're growing soil or if it's gaining in carbon or losing carbon. Okay? My challenge to you is be carbon positive. Go beyond carbon neutral, right? Let's sequester more carbon than we can emit. Yeah, my wife actually loves it when I dig holes and get in there because every time she comes to take pictures, she's pushing dirt on top of me for some reason. I don't know why. So anyway, thank you very much. I guess we're still here for a Q&A after, but I'm done.